And now we watch Extra History's Joan of Arc series, Part 2.
July 22nd, 1431, Rouen Castle. A young woman stands amid inquisitors and theologians. She is an illiterate peasant, yet 3 notaries stand ready to scribble her every word. This is a trial, where she is both defendant and the only witness, and they are determined to rule her a heretic. They ask her about the first time she heard the voices. It was when she was 13, she said, in her father's garden. I heard the voices on the right-hand side, toward the church, and rarely do I hear it without a brightness. The voice was sent by God, and I knew it was the voice of an angel. Was it an angel, they ask, or a demon? To the villagers of Domlery, there was little hint that Joan would go on to do great things. She came from a farming family, humble, but with a leadership role in the village, and spent her youth spinning cloth and helping in the fields. Most expected her to live, marry, and die in Domremy, just like so many generations of girls had done before her. Though there were a few odd things about her. First off, she was a particularly devout child, one so eager to attend mass and take local pilgrimages that other children teased her for it. And on occasion, she spent excessive time at confession. Her little town of Domremy was a bit of its own world, with its own identity. In fact, Joan didn't even consider herself as living in France. The area where she lived was officially neutral in the ongoing civil war, but most people leaned Armagnac and considered the Dauphin the legitimate king, which was unfortunate, since it was also surrounded by Burgundian territory and subject to raids. Growing up, Joan saw Burgundian troops sack her village. What no one knew, though, even her parents, was that Joan heard voices. They came to her in light, using the language of angels. First, the Archangel Michael, then Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. Initially, they just gave her religious and moral instructions. When she was 16, they gave her a mission. For months, English...
Okay, so this is a big topic. Well, maybe not a big topic, because not many people talk about it, but this is something interesting, in terms of like theologian debate. Some people just write off Joan of Arc as unhinged and crazy, while others would be more willing to be like, nah, it's legit. I guess it depends. I imagine most who don't like practice or really believe in religion would just write it off as insane, her as insane. I mean, for those of you who don't know, I am a Christian. I go to church. I read the Bible. I went to, Bible college and I earned a bachelor's in theology. So, I believe in the spiritual and all that. I usually try not to talk about that on this channel. On this channel, I only try to cover secular history. You might see in the side right here where I have my social media stuff. So I have another YouTube channel called Edwin de Jesus, where I cover, I actually teach theology and talk about the Bible and whatnot. And Joan of Arc is an interesting figure because, obviously she claimed, and you might even see a lot of claims that some people would say, they talked to angels or like they saw visions of hell and whatnot, and it is something, and there is an idea that there could be, demons, right? Demons pretending to be angels, giving people, messages that they probably would fall for. And it's interesting that it brought up in the beginning of this video, was she really visited by angels or demons? I guess if you're looking through a supernatural perspective, it's like, But if you're just looking completely secular, you're probably like, nah, she's just crazy. I think, like, with Islam, some people who are not for Islam, like, the story, is that the Prophet Muhammad met with the angel Gabriel and all that. Some would say that those who would say, like Islam is false might say like, oh no, Muhammad was visited by like a demon that he believed to be the angel Gabriel, and that just reminded me of that. Like, you know, if you're looking at it through a Christian or biblical perspective, you'd have to find out what exactly these visions are revealing and if they in line with the word of, you know, God and whatnot, and exactly what they were telling her. I mean, I'm not gonna get into it right now, because I feel like I've already gone way too deep into this, and I try not to on this channel, but inevitably, the topic of religion comes up in history, and I'm kind of forced to sort of talk about it, though obviously I try to not go too deep, because that's not what this channel is for. I try to stay only in the line of secular history, but, yeah, it is interesting that I do want to know for Count exactly what these visions entailed, what they were telling her. You know, the gist, at least from what I've heard of these videos, is that, you know, for her to take her mission to save France and, you know, do all that, there's a lot to it, but it is undeniable that Joan of Arc had great zeal in her mission and what she saw, and, you know, was heavily motivated. I think as anyone would if they, you know, thought they were talking to, you know, angels and saints of the past. I don't know. I'm thinking of like making a video about this stuff. I think it's interesting, you know, because there are claims about a lot of people would say, you know, I had a dream or a vision or God told me this and that, and that is a very dangerous, at least like through a Christian / secular thing. There is an idea of discernment that needs to go into it, and it is a very dangerous claim to make at times. God told me this, God told me that, because, you know, depending on what the actual instance is, or if someone's just straight up lying, it could be dangerous to go. That's all I'll say. Like I said, I think it's an interesting thing that I would have to definitely look into Joan of Arc more in my own time. But I don't know, I just thought the opening of this video really brought into my mind all that stuff. So, let's get back to the video, I'm sorry.
French troops had been locked in a stalemate at the city of Orléans. The voices wanted her to save the city. The voice told me that I should raise the siege laid to the city of Orléans, recalled Joan. And me? I answered it that I was a poor girl who knew not how to ride nor lead a war. Wait, what is that sound? Oh, look everyone, it's our friend the Context Fairy. Have you come to sprinkle asterisks into our episode? Okay, what have you got for us? Oh boy, we're gonna have to do most of this in lies. Sorry, Rob, but here's the gist. Joan of Arc is one of the best documented people of medieval Europe. I know it sounds amazing, but this illiterate peasant left a paper trail longer than many kings. And that's largely because of two spectacular trials. The condemnation trial that opened this episode, and the later nullification trial that overturned her conviction for heresy. But it's hard to untangle whether the story we get from these records is completely true. For the condemnation trial, we get...
Yeah, the bias, right? Because it comes across like a sham trial, right? They wanted her to be guilty. So it kind of makes you think, like, alright, what were they writing about her? Like, or if they would turn it around, right? So yeah, obviously already there's bias against her. It's kind of a tragic part of history. There are certain events that are written by people with obvious bias or something to gain by not portraying history in a neutral sense. And sometimes that's all we've got. So, I don't know. I think that's sort of an issue that I've started to realize as I've gone deeper into looking up history, like the sources. Sometimes it's like, you have to be really careful who's telling you anything. Like, even in, like, among YouTubers, like, history YouTubers, you need to be careful. Because, like, you know, I've watched videos, like, we've watched so many of these videos, and, you know, some people would be like, well, there was bias in this video. You know, some more blatant than others, but it's like, you know, I think it's really encouraging, and I would encourage everyone to look into stuff themselves, you know, yeah, like, yeah, I don't want to go on another long rant. I'm sorry. Just definitely, I think history is something everyone has to go on their own. But even then, there are sources out there that you have to be wary of what you're reading, right?
Get verbatim transcripts of Joan describing her life and visions. But this was also a rigged court, set up by her enemies. And she was arguing for her life. Therefore, it's possible she may have changed details or added to her visions in hopes of convincing the judges that these messages were in line with Catholic thinking. By contrast, the nullification trial, which happened 25 years after her death, mind you, was rigged by her allies to vindicate her. And they did that by collecting testimony from anyone who'd ever met or known Joan. But of course, that was after she'd become a martyred hero, which in all honesty, probably colored people's memories.
Yeah, that's the thing, huh? Now you gotta kind of have to work with that. Yeah, there's a lot to that, huh? Boy.
So can we believe these accounts of her early life and visions? Well, maybe. For the sake of this story, we're going to trust them. But it's always good to remember that some bias may be at work. But okay, back to Orleans. Why was it so important? Well, for starters, it was strategically vital, providing access to the Loire River. If it fell, the English could finally roll up the Dauphins' territory in southern France. But it was also psychologically important, because this awful stalemate had come to symbolize this whole phase of the war. You see, when King Charles VI and Queen Isabeau agreed to disinherit the Dauphins and make King Henry of England heir to the French throne, that was game. All Henry had to do was live longer than King Charles, and he would be the legitimate King of France. And that was supposed to be easy mode, since Charles was mentally ill, in poor health, and 18 years his elder. But then, Henry dropped dead at 35. Charles died 2 months later, leaving the French crown in the hands of Henry's 9-month-old son. So in the north, you had a claimant to the throne, supported by a treaty, who was too young to be crowned for 15 years, and in the south, you had a claimant that had the right bloodline, but who was disinherited and couldn't get to the city where all French kings must be crowned. When both kings were alive, people knew what they were fighting for. Now, the conflict had become a rudderless stalemate, with both sides lacking inspiring leadership or the comfort of a righteous cause. Joan's mission was to guide the Armagnacs into a holy war.
Stains are certain, so is the power of tide.
Joan slipped out of her village, made her way to a nearby town, and demanded to see the garrison commander. She was on a mission from God, she said. He must provide her with an escort and deliver her to the Dauphins. The commander was not too pleased with this delusional girl, and told her to go back home. But Joan came back, twice, and each time with more followers from the town and surrounding countryside. Eventually, he gave in, and some of his soldiers would accompany Joan to the Dauphins' court. But the road they would take wound through Burgundian territory, a dangerous proposition for a soldier, and even more perilous for a teenaged girl traveling alone with rough men. So Joan's supporters, the peasants and families of the town, decided she should ride in disguise. Joan cut her hair short, and the townspeople gifted her a horse, a sword, and a suit of men's campaigning clothes, the kind that tied together so they were hard to remove by force. And after her long journey, her entrance into court caused a sensation. This young girl had traveled nearly 200 miles through enemy territory to bring the Dauphins a divine message. She'd even dressed like a man to guard her chastity. And that, well, that presented a bit of a theological problem. You see, Joan was not the first holy woman who wanted to share religious visions with the Dauphins. He already had one visit him a decade before, and another who'd taken up residence in a cemetery to preach her visions. But they were a little more orthodox. Joan's message was a political one, and the manner of her dress violated Old Testament rules against women wearing men's clothing. But the issue was, Charles and his court absolutely believed that God sent angels and saints to speak to people. And if Joan's visions were indeed divine, turning her away might bring the wrath of God the Father on his already precarious court. Plus, her message that Charles was indeed the true king was a needed morale boost.
Yeah, there's a lot to gain politically, right? Obviously, nowadays I would say you keep religion out of politics. That's kind of the idea of separation of church and state, I think most governments take, and obviously we're living in a world where it's not as dominated by faith as I'd imagine medieval Europe was, in comparison. But, yeah, there's a lot to this, obviously, like, the sensation of just crossing through enemy territory, that's just a great story to tell, obviously she's different, dressing like a dude, that already sets her apart, her message that he's the true king, obviously, there's a lot to gain from Charles by completely allowing this to happen, right? Or being like, alright, I'll trust you, you're legit, in terms of, and I always think when you turn something into a holy war, it motivates people. I mean, most wars motivated, there's a idea of nationalism, fighting for your country, and that's usually enough to, motivate people. Wars can be built just through that, but, I find in history when you make something a religious matter, it also boosts up the fervor of people, especially the devout, because now it's like God. Like, there's an idea, obviously, that this life is temporary, and then you gotta think of the eternal life, and where you're going once you're gone from this mortal coil. And, like, obviously being on God's good side is a huge, huge factor of that. So when you turn something into, this is what God wants, you'll find people move forward with a lot more zeal, a lot more willingness to endure hardship and not give up, because now it's like the eternal playing field is on the line, And so, yeah, obviously you have a lot to gain politically, but also theologically from this. So you can definitely see why Charles, at least for a time, definitely tolerated Joan. But eventually he leaves her to her fate. I don't think he doesn't even try to save her. So obviously after a while I was like, okay, I'm done with you. But yeah, at least at first you can definitely see why she was entertained, right? Or like why he entertained her.
And she was a celebrity with a following. People were writing books about her. On the other hand, they also believed that demons could masquerade as angels. And if Joan were a pawn of Satan, inviting her into his court would similarly damn Charles's efforts to regain his rightful throne. And on top of that, he was nervous about looking foolish. So he ordered an investigation. There would be a discernment of spirits, a series of tests to conclude whether Joan's mysterious voices came from heaven or hell.
Okay, I'm glad I talked about this in the beginning of the video. the idea of discernment and all that. Again, I almost kind of want to make a video on my other channel talking about this topic, about this idea of if people, who claim to see such things and whatnot. Yeah, there's a lot to it, and a lot of biblical ideas, and again, discernment is a biblical principle, there's a saying in the Bible that, Satan disguises himself as an angel of light, which is an idea that even he's deceived people, and obviously this issue came up with Joan of Arc, so, yeah.
First, a physical examination. Joan called herself La Pucelle, the maid. And that didn't just mean young girl. That meant a virgin. This was a sticking point, because medieval theologians believed only virgin women could receive divine visions. But after retiring to a private area...
Yeah, that's... the virginity thing. Yeah. Yeah, so the thing about virginity... at least with the medieval theologians' idea of that, is that it's probably a little wrong. At least in that, in the Bible, there was a prophetess. We have an example in the Bible, the book of Judges, that there's the prophetess Deborah, And, you know, obviously she was used of God, a judge, and a prophetess, but she was married, and there were, you know, other prophetesses, you know, female prophets in the Bible who were married and had marital status. Even actual prophets in the Bible were married and were not chaste. They were not virgins. But you know, but at the same time, the Bible does say wait till marriage, which is something most people ignore. But you know, before you do the nasty, but it's not a requirement to receive visions. You know, I probably should have I should have uploaded this to my other channel because I'm getting way too into the Bible. I don't know how this is gonna do, but if you guys like me giving my ideas, jump to my other channel, Edwin de Jesus. That's where I talk unabashedly about religion and the Bible and theology and God, you know. And you actually for once hear me talk about crap I know instead of secular history. I'm like, I wonder how this is gonna go. Like I was throughout the entire 100 Years War videos. You know, secular history I'm ignorant of, but in the realm of theology, yeah, you know, for the most part I do know what I'm talking about there.
A group of noblewomen and nuns said she checked out. With that established, Charles then sent her to a group of theologians in order to examine her visions and beliefs. Were they orthodox? Heretical? Did they have a hint of brimstone, perhaps? Was she a virtuous person? Joan came back with a clean bill of spiritual health. She was virtuous and sincere, the theologians said. But
we've done it. We've tested her 100% pure holiness. You know? It's like a freaking test. It's like a freaking doctor's visit. You know? I don't know. I just found that funny.
They couldn't be sure if her messages really came from a divine source. But not to worry. They'd also come up with an easy way to check. Send her to Orleans. That's right.
Just throw... That's a great way to prove it at the end. Hey, if she really is of God, just throw her in danger. If she wins, survives, it must be God. You know? Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Fit this teenage maid out in armor. Send her with the reinforcements that were already headed to the city. And see what she could do. If she managed to break this intractable 6th-month siege, they would be pretty darn sure that God was with her. And if not, well, the most they'd lose would be a horse, a suit of armor, and some men who were going there anyway. They sent Joan into a crash course of medieval combat, training her to ride a warhorse and move in plate armor, teaching her basic tactics. Then, they presented her with a white banner, embroidered with Charles's fleur-de-lis symbol of the Trinity, and her chosen symbol, the names of Jesus and Mary. And scholars, for their part, worked overtime digging into obscure prophecies that might support Joan. There had been a long-standing tradition that a maid would emerge to save France, and they marshaled every scrap they could find to support that, including a prediction that supposedly came from Merlin. Wizards in history, heck yeah!
Yeah, they're just throwing everything, huh? At this point, it's just you gotta get... It feels like you have to go with the propaganda, right? Like, we need to build this story around this person to make it even more great, you know? Frickin' Merlin. Oh, that's interesting.
So backed by shaky prophecies, and in a suit of unfamiliar armor, the 17-year-old Joan rode off to war.
And we will be looking at that tomorrow in part 3. Bye, everyone.